Hello, everybody. This is yet again a recorded Zoom interview. And for regular viewers of the channel, this is a familiar face. Jim O'Connor, USGS geologist down in Portland, Oregon, has been a big player in the Ice Age floods, A to Z, that we did a couple winters ago. And I just happened to see Jim in person a couple nights ago. And Jim was saying, "Hey, I've been lurking. I've been watching a little bit of that Geology 351. And some of what you guys are talking about with the Ellensburg Formation is tied to what I'm currently thinking about and what Jim has been working on with the Ellensburg Formation over the years. So let's call in an expert and just see where we go. Jim, let's stick with the format. What's the weather like today in Portland, Oregon?
It is warm and sunny, and for someone like me from Seattle, it gets above 80, and it's it's a little hot.
Right, right. Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. But it's just right up here too in Ellensburg. So let's enjoy this Tuesday afternoon for about a half an hour or so. Let's get right into it, Jim. In the class, I doubt you've seen every episode, but we are just turning the corner and starting to think about the Upper Ellensburg Formation. As I define it, it's the top of the Elephant Mountain lava flow, which is about 10.8 million years ago, and we start getting younger than that. And I assume we're going to just get right back into those golden quartzites that we have been talking about a little bit in the lower Ellensburg, in the Rattlesnake Ridge member and in the Selam member. So I know that you've spent a lot of years thinking and looking at those golden quartzites. Can you fill our viewers in to start with? Why are you so interested in these golden quartzite cobbles?
Well, a couple reasons. I guess one is I'm just interested in the Columbia River in general and big rivers, and of course these golden quartzites are marking the Columbia River and maybe the Snake River paths, and as I think you've been discussing with your class, those paths have been changing, and I'm interested in how big rivers work and what causes them to shift routes or even directions. So that's one thing, and the other aspect that's really got me geared up over the last few years is one of our main activities of the mapping project that I'm part of is mapping the Columbia River Gorge, and those golden quartzites are here in the gorge. Brett's called them the Satsup gravels. They've been called the Hood River gravels. They've been called the Snipes Mountain conglomerate, and they're telling the story of the Columbia River as it's come through the gorge. And there's been some big changes there as well. And so that's what has gotten me interested in the Upper Ellensburg Formation. But
Okay.
but also, oh,
Please continue. Yeah, go.
But also at the same time, and I don't know how much you've talked about this with this class. My colleague, who's just 20 feet down the hallway here, Lydia Steich, has been working on the Columbia River and Snake River histories by a very different approach, by using these detrital zircon fingerprints in the sand deposits, and it's really fun, sort of coming together, sort of bringing different approaches and and coming from different directions, really, to think about some of these really interesting river shifts.
Thank you. How about we do this for the next few minutes, calling just an audible. For the viewers, we'll do a few basic things just to involve everybody, and then we'll steer a little bit more and more into talking specifics about the Ellensburg Formation as it pertains to my class in specifics. And you can guide us a little bit in the next few weeks as to what we might want to look at in our course. So the broad thing for everybody, it's been known, I think, for more than a century, I guess, that if you find these golden quartzite cobbles in central Washington, let's say, that needs to be the Columbia River because there's only golden quartzite bedrock in northern Washington, maybe even specifically northeastern Washington, to then document that that has to be a Columbia River story. Everyone still agrees with that, Jim? Do you agree with that? If you find a golden quartzite that it's that convincing that this is Columbia for sure?
Well, with one caveat, the Snake River and Salmon Clearwater systems also have quartzites in them
Hmm.
as well. So from the pebble counts that we've done, you can't really tell those two river systems apart on the basis of the presence or absence of quartzites.
Huh.
Um, so
That's a
um,
bummer.
yeah, it is. It's been a total bummer.
Yeah.
We spent a whole summer in the driveway of my garage doing pebble counts from buckets of gravel from all over the Northwest and thinking, okay, we're going to find the the keystone class type that's going to help us separate everything out, and
Yeah.
we didn't. Um,
Didn't. Okay.
there are some hints in the gravels that we can use to like separate the snake from the Columbia,
Okay.
but it's not. Um, yeah, there's no magic bullet, um,
Okay.
so to speak.
Well, I'll kind of half pretend I didn't hear that because it's nice and simple for us. And whatever. I don't know how much we'll explore the snake contributions. Although now that I said it out loud, I guess I will. I probably will try to do one of these with Lydia as well in the next couple of weeks. And I know she does have a bunch of that tetraidal zircon sand telling a Snake River story. So maybe that's where we can go right now. Anyway, um, thinking about my class, Lower Ellensburg versus Upper Ellensburg versus Ringold, like, can you give us just a broad idea of the quartzite cobbles? When are they showing up? I don't remember them showing up in the Vantage, let's say, if we're back close to 16 million years ago. So when, as we march our way younger and younger through the Ellensburg Formation, are we picking up robust amounts of quartzite cobbles, at least in central Washington?
Yeah, I think all of the Columbia River interbeds, going back to the Vantage, have um, um, Columbia River signatures in places. Even the Vantage horizon.
Huh.
I'm not sure exactly where, but
Yeah.
I think so. I think the Columbia River has been in the neighborhood of the Columbia River basalts since before the basalts.
Okay.
Um, but in the lower Ellensburg, and I'm no expert on the Ellensburg Formation, I've just been
That's
reading the
fine.
literature, but it seems
Yeah.
like, you know, um, going back to the oldest of the interbeds, you see evidence of these Columbia River gravels sort of moving, back and forth, east and west across the landscape, basically from the Yakima area. I think there's Columbia River quartzites or
Hmm.
exposed in Yakima Canyon,
Hmm.
all the way to Sentinel Gap on the Columbia. So the river was shifting back and forth during Lower Ellensburg time and leaving its mark in some of these interbeds, and and I guess the thinking is that moving back and forth has been sort of the interaction of these volcaniclastic sediments that have been coming off the Cascade Range, and depending on you know how fast those are coming, if you're building a big fan, it's going to push the Columbia River to the east, and then maybe between active episodes of volcanism, the Columbia can work its way um, back west. But what is clear, pretty clear, at least in my mind, is the during most of that time, and then for sure up into Upper Ellensburg time, Snipes Mountain conglomerate time, that the Columbia River was flowing southwest out of the Yakima Basin towards the modern course of the Columbia River in the area of Goldendale, and then heading west from there. So,
well, let's that's where I was hoping we'd go with this. So now we're in Upper Ellensburg. We're right on top of the Elephant Mountain. We may or may not, as a class, go to Cherry Hill or Snipes Mountain conglomerate, Grandpa Carl's place there in that quarry. I know there's an incredible amount of quartzite cobbles right there at Emerald Road. So that particular time for the next few million years, maybe between 10 and 5, are you saying the Columbia is generally heading southwest? And are you saying it's heading straight to Goldendale? Is it going over a lower Sadis Pass at some
well,
point?
yeah, it looks like it's kind of, it's, for me as a quaternary geologist, it's kind of mind-boggling, being at Mabton and seeing these Columbia River gravels basically going up the slope, up and over the Horse Heaven Hills, basically crossing the Horse Heaven Hills a fair bit east of Sadis Pass, but in the Bickleton area,
Got it.
south, southwest of Mabton Granger area, and
So for our viewers who are surprised by what you're saying, you're not really saying the river's going uphill. It's not climbing from Mabton up to Bickleton and down to Goldendale. You're saying that that ridge was low or even non-existent at the time we're depositing those cobbles?
yeah, it pretty much had to be non-existent, and
Hmm.
and I don't know if you've discussed Schmenke's thesis in your class, but it's a tour de force.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of work, and he makes the point that after um, Elephant Mountain time, the last of the Columbia River basalts in that area, there was this sheet, there was this big braid plane of the Columbia River heading southwest from Mabton, and so of course all of that relief of the Horse Heaven Hills has to have developed subsequently. There's no Paleo Canyon that
Yeah.
involved, and if you go to the foot of the northern front of the Horse Heaven Hills, you can see these gravels. They're standing up on end vertically, and that took me a while to figure out because I've never seen fluvial gravels standing vertically. Like I said, I'm a quaternary geologist. We don't really
Yeah.
deal with these
Right.
with deformation like that. So it's pretty
Yeah.
wild, and it is, and it's one aspect of the issue that makes it interesting. If all this tectonic deformation occurred after the Snipes Mountain conglomerate, it might be pretty young because we really don't have a firm handle on the age of those gravels. But the more we think about it and the more that we look, the younger and younger they're getting, at least in my mind.
Okay. Well, there's not a firm handle, but what's our loose handle on the age of those Snipes cobbles? Has to be younger than 10. Snipes Mountain conglomerate has to be older than what?
Well,
Five.
here's one aspect of the problem that really got me interested in the Dalles Basin in the eastern Columbia River Gorge, where the Columbia River runs through now. There are sequences of fluvial gravels in there, but they're quartzite free, and and they're class compositions that are indicative of Eastern Oregon, like a Paleo John Day or the Paleo Deschutes rivers draining central and eastern Oregon. And that sequence of gravels is capped by a basalt that's 5.4 million years old. So no Columbia River in the Dalles Basin until sometime after 5.4 million years ago. So that suggests that the diversion of the Columbia River from this southwest path from Mabton into its current Wawula Gap route occurred after 5.4 million. And we know it occurred before about 1 million because we see 1 million year old basalts in the Dalles Basin down close to present river level that are sitting on top of quartzite gravels. So that from those relationships in the Dalles Basin, we know it seems like the switch occurred sometime between 5-ish and 1 million years ago. And so that, makes the whole story a fair bit younger than what folks have thought of before.
Wow.
And yeah, so this, and then we start, and then, then another thing that's always sort of bugged me as long as I've been up here is the Ringold Formation.
Yes.
How do you get a lake there? And every paper that you read about the Ellensburg Formation and the Ringold Formation, they say, oh, it's controversial how you got a lake here in this basin. People have argued, well, it was held up by the rising Horse Heaven Hills, or and that's another mechanism that's been explained for diverting these rivers. But I mean, can you imagine a fold growing at an inch or two per 1,000 years, diverting?
Yeah.
Defeating the Columbia River. I mean,
right.
I mean, the Yakima River, much smaller river. It's not a piddly river, but it's compared to the Columbia, it's sliced like butter through the anticlines at Yakima Canyon. So I mean, all of these. So what, how does Ringold relate to the diversion? And
well, now we're getting somewhere. So I'm loving. No, I didn't mean it that way. No, that last 10 minutes was solid gold. No pun intended. I want to keep going there, but yes, the Ringold. What's the purpose of the label of the Ringold? Is it just a vestige of an older time, or is it still an important label for? I still think of between 8 and 3 million years ago, right in the middle of this real estate you're talking about. So two things. Do you like the label Ringold? Does it mean something to you? Should we still use it? And do you agree there was a lake, or you're just confused about why we're even talking about a lake during Ringold time?
Well, yeah, a few things. I think the term is useful, but a lot of these terms are have problems. Like the Ellensburg Formation is a classic one, and the Ellensburg Formation represents continental sedimentation over a period of time, and it has all these members that work in places and don't work. But even as a general body, it in some places the Ringold or the Ellensburg Formation is volcaniclastic material coming off the Cascades. In other places, it's Columbia River gravels and maybe Snake River gravels coming in from the completely opposite direction. So when you when you have a formation that is jumbling together two very different depositional environments, it creates confusion, and it's a common it's a common situation. And the Ringold is similar. I mean, the basal part looks like a fluvial gravel sort of floodplain sequence, and then it has this upper part which is a lacustrine sequence, and the whole thing is probably part of a deposition in the Pasco Basin. So I think um, as a formation, it probably has some utility, although parts of it are probably contemporaneous, almost certainly contemporaneous with the Ellensburg formation. But I will say that the upper part is pretty convincingly a lacustrine environment of some sort or another, and so I think I think it ties in to the story of the diversion of the Columbia River, and I think everybody who has looked at the Ringold and thought about it, going back for 100 years, realizes, okay, somehow it must relate to the history of the Columbia River. But it is, Richard Foster Flint, Aaron Waters, J. Hoover Mackin, Schmieke, Gary Smith, the Rydell, Lindsay, Tolan, Fecht group at Hanford have all, cast ideas out of how do you get this lake in this basin and then get a through-going river. It's a fun challenge.
So if we just keep going with that frame of mind right there, so we're all agreeing pretty young in the Ringold, we have some kind of lake system. There's debate about why the lake is there, but okay, so there's the sediments in the upper Ringold say there's a lake. Great. And then are we, yeah.
And they're as young as 3.5 million years old.
That's where I'm headed. So are we flirting with the Ice Age now? Or are we draining the lake somehow before we start the Ice Age story, the earliest glaciation business? So is there just as much of a mystery about why we're getting rid of the lake as opposed to starting the lake?
Yeah, I think the top of the, we're still working on getting better geochronology in the Ringold, but in from various lines of evidence, it seems like that the Ringold deposition of the Ringold stopped somewhere between 3 and 4 million years ago. So that's probably preceding, the most of the ice ages. Well, one thing that's interesting though is it looks like that from Kevin Lindsay's work, it looks like there are multiple lake cycles in there, and a couple lake cycles filled up with sediment, but the final one looks like it did not fill. You had a lake there, and then all of a sudden the lake drained, and which is another clue, I think, to how all these pieces might work together. And
well, I'm interested in. Okay, well, that seems like an interesting time for me personally, just without knowing very much. And now suddenly my brain goes to the initiation of the uplift in the Cascades, or starting to cut Hell's Canyon, or some sort of super regional story involving the entire Pacific Northwest. I think I've gotten into this a little bit with you, not in this format, but maybe by email. Where are we with that? First of all, I interviewed Lydia recently with our Cascade series, and she shared the work that you and she did together with, correct me now, but I think as young as 3 million years, we haven't really done major uplifting in the core of the Cascades until 3. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think that's where we're heading. We're continuing to in the axis of the Cascade Range, looking at the timing and magnitude of uplift, and it's pretty clear that there was a significant amount of uplift after 3.5 million years ago, and most of that uplift may have initiated as young as 2 million years ago from this is work that's being led by another person in our group, Gabe Gordon, and it's pretty intriguing that this cascade arc, so there's a lot happening starting, at 3.5, and if the diversion of the Columbia dates to about that time, which I think is plausible. I think you can invent a reasonable story that the Ringold Lake relates to the diversion of the Columbia and into the Wallula Gap reach, and then since then there's been significant uplift broadly in central eastern Oregon and Washington, and significant uplift focused in the Cascade Range, and perhaps the whole Horse Heaven Hills fold developed in that time frame. So those,
that seems to be the most interesting thing to feature on right here, if I'm hearing you correctly. That Horse Heaven Hills, is that some sort of outlier as far as rising that ridge compared to, as you just said, like the Yakima River has no trouble with these rising ridges. The class was just at Sentinel Gap last Thursday. We've got the Columbia there holding its own against this uplifting ridge. Is the Horse Heaven Hills the only Yakima fold that is somehow doing something different to cause this Columbia to get way the hell off of its original course?
No, I think some of the other folds were probably non-existent or minimal at at that time too, and like the Saddle Mountains, those were uplifted. I don't really know exactly the timing on that, but you have Ringold there that's deformed pretty
right.
So I think we do know that some of the Yakima folds were in existence, starting back at the time of Columbia River basalt, the flows, but it was, in general, it seems like it had to be a pretty low relief environment until after the diversion of the Columbia. And let me just lay it out here, because this is an idea that's been out there before. What we're thinking is that this diversion of the Columbia was caused by a blockage of the Columbia River, and this is an idea that Aaron Waters had before, that and instead of being diverted by growing folds, Aaron Waters argued that it was this big fan of Ellensburg Formation that blocked the Columbia, created the Ringold Lake, and that lake found and ponded up to an elevation where it found an alternative route out of the Pasco Basin, that being Wallula Gap. And Schminke argued, well, it couldn't have been Ellensburg Formation because you see the Snipes Mountain gravel is on top of the bulk of the volcanic classic. So there's a big river heading southwest after main phase of Ellensburg volcaniclastic deposition. But there's other potential blockages too. There could be volcanism in the Cascade Arc that blocked the Columbia, or the Simcoe volcanics, and that's kind of where we're heading right now. And this is an idea that Gary Smith mentioned, and his papers are also quite excellent on the Ellensburg Formation. And this is an idea that Gary put forward just kind of as a teaser at the end of one of his papers. But I think there's something there. The timing kind of works, that geography kind of works, and it's kind of hard to imagine that, Simcoe volcanics blocking the Columbia River and shifting it, into the Little Gap route. But if there's a lot less relief in the landscape, and you do see Simcoe volcanics filling paleo canyons that contained the Pomona and the Elephant Mountain flow, it might work. We haven't found the Smoking Gun, lava dam site yet, but you block the Columbia, you form a lake, and that lake, a couple times, maybe a few blockages. The final blockage, though, raises the lake to the level where it overtops the Saddle Gap at whatever elevation it was at the time, and then the Columbia is shifted, and there's no going back once it cuts into that notch.
Well, this works. I think this is going to work for a lot of people. I think the few programs I've done with rivers that are shifting all over the place, and then, of course, lava dams and other things. You know this as well, Jim. People just love this. They know what a river is. They feel attachment to these rivers. They know what the cobbles look like in the bottom of the river. And then if you find these cobbles in places that are high and dry, then people just love that stuff. So they love your work. And I forgot about the Simcoe thing. So the Simcoe volcanics are in this time window we're talking about, like 4 to 3 or 4 to 2 or something?
Yeah, 4 to 1, basically.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so 4.5 to 1. So, and we haven't talked about the snake, but I think the snake was part of this too.
Well,
that's a whole different chapter.
Well, let's do two things before we quit. So, and if it's easy to do, you can punt if you want. Okay, I think I followed what you're saying in this chat. And what is the snake doing during some of this time that we're talking, during Ringold time, let's say, or whatever? What's the conventional story about the snake? And then is there any new work being done on the snake to somehow change some narratives that everybody seems to know?
Well, as you know, there's been lots of ideas about where the snake has gone over time, and and it is confusing, and but I think one possibility is, the gravels, the conglomerates at the base of the Ringold exposures, and those have a pretty strong Snake River affinity to them.
Really?
Yeah, they have a lot of greenstones in them, and this isn't the detrital zircon magic that Lydia does.
Okay.
This is just looking at the rock types that are in there. So it could be that the snake was going into the Umatilla Basin, as suggested by Steve Rydell and Tolan and Terry Tolan and Kevin Lindsay, but and they have said that they've observed Snake River gravels in the Umatilla Basin, but we haven't seen them in the Dalles Basin for that time frame. And the Snake River gravels are pretty distinctly different than say the Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, or Eastern Oregon, Paleo John Day, Paleo Deschutes River gravels, and so that's why I've been doing 1,000 pebble counts to try to sort this out. So I think one possibility is the snake was flowing in across Pasco Basin, but pretty much in the opposite direction that the Columbia River does now, and up the Yakima River, joining the Columbia somewhere in the Yakima Valley, and flowing over the Horse Heaven Hills, just like the Columbia was. Of course,
the snake we're talking about doing this.
yeah, I think the snake may have been part of the game, and this is something it's pretty speculative at this point, and we're working with the class counts plus the detrital zircon assessments to see if we can really tie this together. But it's kind of hard to imagine that the Columbia River coming into the Pasco Basin and flowing out one way, and the Snake River coming into the Pasco Basin and flowing out a different direction.
Yeah,
I just have a hard time seeing that.
So thanks for sharing this kind of speculative work in progress stuff. Are these some new discoveries of finding some cobbles that are pretty low in the Ringold? Is that the time frame we're talking about right now, like 8 to 5 or something? We've got the snake coming into the basin?
Well, the base of the Ringold, at least what's exposed along the river, sort of north of Pasco and Richland, is a fluvial conglomerate that is pretty consolidated, and folks have known about it for a long time.
Okay.
But it does have a lot of greenstones in it, which are maybe not snake, but salmon clearwater system. Whether it's technically the snake or not, but something from
to the east,
coming from western, south, and west, and so there is, the gravel suggests a Snake River provenance, and we see enough Snake River, snake, salmon, clearwater greenstones basically in some of the Snipes Mountain conglomerate type gravels in the eastern Yakima Valley to make us think, oh, maybe the snake was coming into the valley.
As early as when?
Well, that would be early Snipes Mountain time. So post Elephant Mountain. We don't, prior to the lake phase of the Ringold.
Wow. And so through the Hell's Canyon?
Well, that's a whole nother question. And that's another.
Yeah.
This is, Lydia is working hard on that question right now. You should ask her about that.
I will. I will.
I think she has some pretty interesting results that she's teeing up.
Thank you. So last thing before we quit, with talking about Lydia Steisch and her work, the one time I had her up here in 2018, I brought her to Snipes Conglomerate. I think it was her first visit to that clay pit there at Granger. And I was so proud to show these quartzite cobbles and everything. And she's like, oh, yeah, interesting. She went right to the sand, and she just started digging sand and putting it in her Ziploc bags. And I was so confused and surprised by that, because at that point, 2018, I really hadn't heard about this detrital zircon game to tell these river stories. So she's been at this almost a decade now, and you've been at it more than a decade, Jim. To this point, how are these river sands with detrital zircons and your cobble work and others that have been thinking about the rivers for a long time, is it a natural marriage, this sand and cobble story, or are there major differences just generally?
It's an obvious approach to try both. Looking at that, cobbles has some pitfalls, but just looking at the sand does too. But I would say, for the most part, these approaches have been basically lining up.
Nice.
And sometimes just the detrital zircon work requires a lot of the statistical models and that sort of stuff that I can't really wrap my brain around, and sometimes the results just don't make any sense at all. But and you think, okay, there's just some sort of spurious fluke going on here that is, matching up this river with a tributary of the Amazon or something. It's not like that, but
right.
But for the most part, it's worked, and it's been interesting because in a few times where the detrital zircon analyses go, oh, that doesn't really make sense, and then I go look again at the gravel composition, and I go, oh, maybe it does. And no, it's been really a productive exchange, and now we go to these sites together oftentimes,
good.
And
nice.
Like we've been to Grandpa Carl's quarry together, and we've sampled the sands, we've done class counts, we've sampled ash beds in there, and it's a long process getting all these data into some sort of final interpretable form, but it's working out. We're working on the Ringold too, trying to better understand its depositional environment and its sediment sources, both from class composition and detrital zircon work. And so, yeah, it's been a very fortuitous, I would say, sort of convergence of interests and also directions. I mean, she's been working, from upstream to downstream, and I've been chasing these Satsep gravels, Ellensburg Formation, Troutdale Formation, whatever you want to call it, Dalles Formation, upstream, and trying to make sense out of it.
Nice. Last little stinger at the end, and then we'll quit, I promise. So at Granger Clay Pits, Grandpa Carl's place, if we're, let's say, 9 million years ago with some of those cobbles, are there some that's one spot that you're thinking you're seeing some Snake River gravels?
Yeah, so I have my Granger notebook notes here, and I think at 9 million years, you're probably pretty low in the section there. You might be down in the clay pit part, at least according to the fossils. And I had just come when I was there with Lydia 2 years ago. We had just come from the Ringold Formation, and I did a class count there, and I noted that it was very different than the Ringold Formation, much more of a Columbia River signature, a lot fewer porphyries, and sort of metavolcanics, the greenstone stuff that you see coming out of the Snake Salmon Clearwater. So I think the Snipes Mountain section in particular is probably, if I was going to guess, is dominated. At least the quartzite gravel part on top is dominated by Columbia River. And those gravels, they could be as young as 3 or 4 million years old, if you think that gravel cessation was triggered by deposition of the gravel was halted by blockage by Simcoe volcanism. And not at Snipes, but other places in the Yakima Valley, you do see lacustrine deposits on top of the gravel there. So consistent with some sort of downstream blockage.
Thank you for your time, Jim. This gives us all sorts of narratives and leads to take our class. And for the general viewers, I'm sure there's plenty there to chew on as well. Can you hold the line for just a sec? I'll stop the recording and then we'll chat a couple more minutes. So thank you, Jim O'Connor from Portland, Oregon.